It took less than 8 hours for the video that I made to not matter anymore. And now I've kind of changed my opinion back, and I think we might be in a wide receiver game at 10. Now, I know you guys are asking, what changed my mind? Why have I all of a sudden gone from thinking we're going to take a wide receiver in rounds 2 or 3 to, you know what, we need to take a wide receiver in whatever round? Well, I'll tell you what changed. And what changed is the New York Jets have officially decided that they are going to use one of their official visits for draft prospects on Treylin Burks. Now, this is a big deal because I have Treylin Burks ranked as my number 3 wide receiver in this draft class, behind Drake London and Garrett Wilson. And I thought, what better opportunity to talk about these wide receivers and who I like and where I would take them than right now. So that's what this video is going to be. It might be a little bit longer of a video, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to break down my rankings of the wide receivers, where I have them ranked and all of that. And then what we're going to do is I'm going to go down and break down each individual wide receiver just to kind of go over how I think they fit on the Jets, if I see them as a fit on the Jets, and where we would possibly take these players if the Jets were to draft them. I have 5 ranked receivers, and then I have 2 round 2 guys, Christian Watson and George Pickens, just because I talked about them in the last video. So let's jump right in, right? So I want to start with who I have as my wide receiver 1 in this draft, and that's Drake London, wide receiver out of USC. The guy's got some crazy good measurables, right? He's 6'4", 219, 33-inch arms. He's 20 years old coming out of USC. Guy's a monster when it comes to, just being an athlete. Now, unfortunately, we don't have a 40 time yet. He's going to do that at his pro day. And at this point, when I'm making this video, he hasn't done his pro day yet, so we don't know what his 40 time is going to be. Now, in his entire college career, his average yards per reception was 13.4. So you can see that at USC, they were trusting him as a deep threat. They were kind of just throwing the ball up to him, having him go up and get it. He was getting a lot of the targets. He was 27.3% of the target share at USC, which is really good. And you just see every year that he played in college, starting at 2019, 2020, and 2021, if you count the fact that the COVID year was a little bit off, his receptions went up every year, his receiving yards went up every year, and his targets went up every year. His catch rate stayed the same at around 71, 72%, and that's a big deal. And then his touchdowns also went up every year, as long as you adjust the COVID year to match what a normal schedule would be. Last year, at the age of 20, he played in 8 games, caught 88 receptions on 124 targets for 1,084 yards. That is a 12.3 yards per reception. He had about 25% of the targets at USC, and he caught 71% of the passes for 7 touchdowns. That is incredible production out of a wide receiver. Now, I know a lot of people are going to be like, he didn't play a lot of good competition, and I hear you, and I get what you're saying, but for me, I have Drake London as my wide receiver 1 because being 6'3", 6'4", being 215 to 220, being his size, he's still really good with the ball after the catch. He still has that yards after the catch ability. He's not scared of taking contact. You see him leaning into contact and using his frame on the tape. And it's just one of those things where he has things that you can't teach. You can't teach 6'4", you know? You can't teach his contested catch ability. Those are natural, those are God-given gifts and abilities that you're not going to teach anywhere. And so, for me, Drake London, wide receiver 1 in this class. Wide receiver 2 for me is Garrett Wilson, wide receiver out of Ohio State. Now, Garrett Wilson comes in at 6 foot, 183, 32-inch arms, 16 yards per reception in college, a 26.3% target share throughout his entire college career, and we do have measurables on him because he ran the 40. He ran a 4.38 at the combine, which is just out of this world. The great thing that I like about Garrett Wilson is I think that he is the most fluid route runner in this draft. He's got really soft hands, and he's really good with the ball after the catch. He almost seems like, to me, a slightly bigger Elijah Moore. He kind of reminds me of Corey Davis. And these are wide receivers that we have on our roster. And I'm not saying that in a bad way. I just look at Garrett Wilson and I go, what he's bringing is more traditional wide receiver skills. And that's not a bad thing. I just think that the reason I have Garrett Wilson as wide receiver 2 for me is because for the Jets, Drake London provides something that I don't think that we have on the roster. Even though Garrett Wilson is such a good route runner, he's not bringing 6'4", 220 to the roster. He's not bringing that basketball background that Drake London has. And that's not a knock on Garrett Wilson. Garrett Wilson is an excellent prospect. It's the same kind of thing that you looked at with Drake London. Every year, 2019, 2020, 2021, he played in every game. His receptions went up. His yards went up. His targets went up. His catch rate went up. His touchdowns went up. And something that Garrett Wilson did that Drake London didn't do is he contributed on special teams. So, to go over his stats for 2021, he played in 11 games and caught 70 receptions on 103 targets. He went for 1,058 receiving yards for an average yard per reception of 15.1. He was targeted 21% of the time whenever they were passing the ball, and he caught 68% of his passes for 12 receiving touchdowns. Garrett Wilson is a beast, and I think that he comes in day one, and I think he makes any football team better. I also don't think he makes it past 8. I think he is going to be an Atlanta Falcon, and if you want him, you either need to trade up or Atlanta needs to go and take something else. I would not be surprised if they went somewhere else, but with that receiving room and the way that it is, I think Garrett Wilson is going to be the next Atlanta Falcon, and I have no problem with that. I think he's a great wide receiver. I think he's going to come in and work really, really well and be the opposite of what Kyle Pitts is, and I don't think that that's a problem, and that's why I don't think that Atlanta is in the Drake London sweepstakes, because they have their own kind of Drake London big body, yards after the catch machine, and that's just Kyle Pitts. So I think Garrett Wilson would bring wide receiver 1 upside with a different dynamic in the wide receiver room. Next wide receiver is Treylin Burks. And I'm going to start speeding through these a little bit better. We all know Treylin Burks' combine scores weren't that great, but he did run a 4.55 in the 40-yard dash. He is 6'2", 225, 33.5-inch arms, coming out of Arkansas. He got 16.8 yards per reception. He caught 31% of the targets at Arkansas, and the guy was just a beast. Same kind of thing. His receptions went up as every year in college went through. He caught 66 balls on 92 targets in the 12 games that he played. He went for 1,100 yards, caught 29.3% of the targets. That's how many. The percentage of targets in passing plays was 29.3. 72% of the balls caught for 11 touchdowns. Here's why I think Treylin Burks might be wide receiver 1 on the Jets board, and why I think it's very, very important that the Jets are using their first in-person kind of meeting with Treylin Burks. Treylin Burks played in the X, in the Z, in the slot. He was used in motion. He was told and asked to do everything at Arkansas, and he did it. Treylin Burks reminds me of what Deebo Samuel brings to the San Francisco 49ers. That versatility in the wide receiver room. And I can't stop thinking of the sets and the things that we would be able to do with Elijah Moore and Treylin Burks as our wide receivers for the future. I look at that and I think of that and I go, holy crap. That's going to be, no one's going to ever know where these guys are going to line up, how they're going to line up, what they're doing. He at 6'2", 225, you know he's going to be dominant in the blocking game, which is something that we need out of our wide receivers. I would not be surprised if Treylin Burks is the pick at receiver for the Jets just because of the versatility that he will provide. I don't take much stock in the combine performance flaws because I look at it and I go, the combine is a flawed system in itself because like they have these guys waking up at 6 a.m. and then doing their runs at like 10 at night. That's what they had the running backs do. These guys were up for like 15, 16 hours. They're never going to be asked to do that on game day. Like I know for a fact that these guys are taking naps in the middle of game day, or if they have the morning game, they're, they put so much time in preparation to be ready. I don't understand why they can't do that stuff for the combine. So I don't look at the combine scores and be like, oh my gosh, this is super bad. Treylin Burks isn't it. I wouldn't be surprised if he's there. Those 3 wide receivers that I talked about, Drake London, Treylin Burks, and Garrett Wilson, are all wide receivers that I would expect the Jets to be in contention to take at 10. These next wide receivers that I'm going to talk about would be what the Jets would do if those 3 wide receivers were off the board and they were picking in the mid-20s. Now, this is in the assumption that someone comes in and trades up to go get somebody at 10. So if the Steelers come up to 10 to try to get Malik Willis if he's still there at 10, if the Ravens come up to 10 to try to get Kyle Hamilton if he's still there to try to get in front of the Washington Commanders to try to have the most dominant safety room in football, whatever it is, if there's a team that's coming up to 10 and we're backing up and now we look at the wide receiver room and Drake London, Garrett Wilson, Treylin Burks aren't there, now we start talking about these 2 guys as people that we might take in the mid-20s. I have my next prospect as Chris Olave, wide receiver out of Ohio State. He's 6 foot, 187. He ran a 4.39 at the combine. He caught 26% of the targets. He got 26% of the targets in his college career while he was at Ohio State. He got 14.5 average yards per carry while he was at Ohio State. And he went to school for 4 years, so he's played a lot of football. I think when you add all of the things that he's done, you've seen him get more and more and more targets as time went on, more and more yards, more and more percent of the target share. And he got more touchdowns as the season went on. The biggest concern I have with Chris Olave is that Garrett, he was at the school a year longer than Garrett Wilson, and he lost his spot to Garrett Wilson. In the college football playoffs, instead of targeting Olave very, very much, or even Wilson very much, Ohio State decided to target the other wide receiver, their wide receiver too. I don't remember his name, where he went for like 6 or 7 touchdowns or something crazy. It's the same kind of effect that happened to Jeremy Ruckert. There are other targets on there, and he still got his own. He has 13 touchdowns this year, which is a crazy, crazy good amount. But I just have a fear with him of, does his skill set translate to the NFL in a deeper role than just being the deep threat? I look at Chris Olave and I have a massive fear that he is just kind of Robbie Anderson. He's just fast and he's your deep threat, and that's not a bad thing, but I also wouldn't want to spend a first-round pick on a guy who's not going to be a super fluid route runner and things like that. Now, I do think that Chris Olave has good hands and he is a fluid route runner and all those things. I would just like to see those tools develop a little bit more. I have no problem taking Chris Olave in the late 20s, but I think the next player on the board, Jamison Williams, might be a legitimate contender for a pick if we trade into the late 20s, if you're okay with having to wait for his availability. Jamison Williams, as we know, tore his ACL in the championship game, and it sucked to see it because he was on track to probably be wide receiver 1 in this draft. Now, everyone knows that availability always trumps talent, and him not being available is what's going to shoot him down draft boards. Now, if the Jets trade back and Jamison Williams is there, and you have to pick between Jamison Williams and Chris Olave, I would look at that wide receiver room and go, we can go 6 to 8 weeks with this wide receiver room. knowing that sometime during the season we're going to add Jamison Williams. Jamison Williams is going to add that deep threat that we saw that he was, because he's blazing quick. He's 6'2", 180 pounds, so he's got length and he's got size, and he's got 32 and an eighth inch arms. His average yards per reception in college were 19.9. Massive. And my biggest concern with Jamison Williams is always going to be that he left Ohio State to go to Alabama. And my concern is and will always be, why couldn't you win the job in Ohio State? I understand that Alabama needed wide receivers, and he went there to be their number one wide receiver, and I totally get that. What went wrong in Ohio State? That's always going to be a question that I'm going to have, and I'm worried that we're getting someone who chose the easy way by transfer portaling out to a bigger and better school that had a better offensive line that was going to give their quarterback more time, and that he was just going to have more time to go deep. I don't know, and I'm going to be honest, I haven't spent too much time on the Jamison Williams tape, but if Jamison Williams is the pick and I have to pick between Jamison Williams and Chris Olave, I hear from a lot of other Jets fans and things like that they really like Jamison Williams, and that JMO might be the pick for the Jets if they trade out of 10 and those top 3 guys aren't there. So guys, those are my top 5 wide receivers. I'm going to go quick through these next 2 wide receivers that I think might be in the option if we decide to not go wide receiver in the first round. And I really only think that there's 2 options here at the wide receiver at 35 or 38. That's Christian Watson out of North Dakota State University and George Pickens out of Georgia. Side note, I would not be surprised if the Jets went really, really heavy on Georgia players, because they're all really, really good, and they've got players that are going to be available at every round in the draft, and they're all studs. But let's start with Christian Watson out of North Dakota State University. He is 6'4", 210 pounds with 32 and a half inch arms. He ran a 4.36 at the combine. Incredible. And he went for 18.6 yards per reception in his entire college career. Now, the biggest concern with him is going to be age. He's going to be 23 starting into the season. He played 4 years at North Dakota State University. And every year he played in those games, he got more receptions and more yards. And the skills and the things that he brings is different. But will that translate to the next level? We know that he wasn't facing great competition in the NFL. And my concern is that Christian Watson reminds me a lot of what Denzel Mims is. A lot of places that I see have Denzel Mims as the comp. They're very, very similar sizes. They ran almost identical 4.3s. They had a lot of the same kinds of things going into the draft. They were both taken in the second round. It's one of those things where I look, is Christian Watson just the next Denzel Mims? Now, I'm not ready to give up on Denzel Mims. I think that he can work, but I do run into that fear that Denzel Mims and Christian Watson are very, very similar players, and I've seen that comp a few times. And then we go into the guy that I think the Jets should pick up in the second round, and that's George Pickens out of Georgia. 6'3", 195. He ran a 4.47 at the draft, which is insanely good. 17.8 yards per reception in college, with 15% of the targets coming out of Georgia. I honestly and truthfully think that if George Pickens doesn't hurt his leg and actually plays this season, we're looking at him as possibly being wide receiver 1 in this draft. And if you're telling me that we can get wide receiver 1 in this draft in the second round at 35 or 38, sign me up. Now, we do have some, I don't want to call them character issues, but we do have some, like, he's a nasty mofo. He likes to get in your face. He likes to make sure that he knows you're there. I think one of the craziest things is he walks up to the opposing team sideline, shushes them, play starts, shoves the their cornerback, into the, just destroys him, looks back at the sideline and shushes them again. It's a crazy thing to look at and to see that he's doing, but I think the Jets need that kind of fire. I think they need a spark plug on that team. And George Pickens, on the website that I'm using for their stats, is getting comped to Jerry Jeudy. If you're telling me that I can get a Jerry Jeudy-like player in the second round, sign me up. The injury does scare me, and the fact that his best season was his rookie year does scare me a little bit. But I think in the second round, I think you'd be naive not to take a guy like George Pickens. I think he provides something that we don't have and would be excellent for this team. Let me know what you guys think. What wide receivers that I maybe not talk about that you have on your list that you would like to Jets the draft? Leave a comment and subscribe. It really helps the channel. I'm trying to grow the channel as quickly as possible so that I can talk with other Jets YouTubers. It's kind of hard to do that with 9 subscribers. But, it's a slow and steady grind. Let me know what you guys think, like I said. And lastly, go Jets.